All right, let's talk about seizure dogs. You know the stories, right? These incredible, almost psychic tales of a dog knowing a seizure is coming before it even starts. It's a really powerful idea. But is it actually true? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dig in and separate the hope from the hard science to find out what's really going on.
So this really is the big question, isn't it? Can a dog really predict a seizure before it happens? I mean, the idea that a dog could give you that crucial warning, those precious moments to get somewhere safe, it's incredibly compelling. But we have to ask, does this idea hold up? Is it scientifically sound? And just as important, is it legally sound?
And look, the appeal is undeniable. There's no doubt about it. But it's so important to separate those heartwarming stories we hear from the actual hard evidence. Because when we do that, a much clearer and honestly a much more useful picture starts to emerge.
Okay, Section 1, a dog's sixth sense. Let's start with what most people believe. For years, right, we've all heard these amazing stories about dogs that seem to have this uncanny, almost psychic ability to know when a seizure is about to happen.
So the thinking is, these dogs are somehow picking up on really subtle changes that we just can't see or feel. You know, maybe it's a change in scent, or a slight shift in heart rate, or even tiny unconscious movements. It's a really compelling idea, for sure. But this leads us to what is probably the single most important distinction in this entire conversation.
All right, Section 2, response versus prediction. Now pay close attention here because this is the most critical point of this whole explainer. We have to understand the difference between a seizure response dog and a so-called seizure-predicting dog. They sound similar, but they are not the same thing at all. And that difference, it has massive scientific and legal implications.
Okay, so here's the deal. A seizure response dog is trained to do specific jobs during or after a seizure happens. A seizure-predicting dog, though, is the one that's claimed to alert somebody before the seizure even starts. See the difference? One is all about reaction, and the other is all about prediction.
And just look at how concrete these response tasks are. We're talking about observable, verifiable actions. A dog can absolutely be trained to hit an alert button or to go get a phone or medication. These are tangible things that you can see, things that directly help someone manage their disability. And that, right there, is the gold standard for a service animal.
So, Section 3, science versus anecdote. We've got these verifiable response tasks on one hand, but on the other, we have this big claim of prediction. So the question is, how does that claim actually hold up when you put it under the scientific microscope?
This quote really just says it all. The scientific evidence supporting the predictive ability of dogs remains extremely weak. And look, while personal stories are incredibly powerful and moving, the consensus among scientists and doctors is pretty clear. There just isn't any strong, repeatable evidence to prove that dogs can predict seizures.
So why is the evidence so weak? Well, a few big reasons. First, there just haven't been any large-scale, controlled studies to prove it. It's also totally possible that dogs are just reacting to tiny, unconscious cues their owners give off right before a seizure, which isn't prediction, it's just really good observation. Then you've got something called confirmation bias, where we remember the one time the dog seemed to get it right, but we forget that 10 times it was a false alarm. And maybe the biggest reason of all, scientists haven't even found a consistent biological signal, a biomarker that a dog could reliably detect in the first place.
And I want to be really clear about this. This does not mean people are making things up or that their experiences aren't real. That bond between a person and their dog is absolutely real, and the comfort they provide is immense. But a compelling story, or even 100 of them, just isn't the same as scientific proof. For that, you really need objective, verifiable data.
Okay, and this brings us to the real world. Section 4, the ADA litmus test. Because this isn't just some academic debate, it has major legal implications, especially when it comes to the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA.
So the ADA is the law that gives people with disabilities the right to have their service animals with them in public places, at work, at school. It's a hugely important law, but it also has a very specific definition of what counts as a service animal and what that animal has to be able to do.
And here's the key phrase right here, work or tasks. For a dog to be protected under the ADA, it has to be trained to do actual work or perform tasks that are directly related to the person's disability. That feeling of comfort or emotional support, it's incredibly valuable, but legally, it doesn't count as a task. It has to be something you can point to and say, the dog does that.
So this really brings us to the legal bottom line.
A seizure response dog? It does those observable tasks we talked about, so yes, it is clearly protected by the ADA. But what about a dog whose only claimed task is this unprovable prediction? Well, that puts it in a really shaky legal spot. Its status as a service animal could actually be challenged, and that challenge could win.
So why does this matter so much? Well, in the real world, it means a school or an employer could legally say no to a dog if the only reason given is this unproven prediction ability. It also means trainers who are out there selling dogs and guaranteeing they can predict seizures, they're on very, very thin ice, legally speaking. At the end of the day, the focus has to come back to what the dog can demonstrably do.
Okay, Section 5, focusing on what works. So after all this, after looking at the science and the law, where does that leave us? I know it might feel a little disheartening, but the goal here is absolutely not to take away hope. It's about channeling our energy and our resources toward the things that are actually proven to work.
Look, the whole point of breaking this down isn't just to debunk something for the fun of it. It's really about empowering people with good, accurate information. That way, you can find the most effective, the most reliable, and, importantly, the most legally protected support for yourself or for someone you love.
So let's boil this all down to the key takeaways. Number 1, seizure response dogs are absolutely legitimate service animals. They do vital, verifiable tasks. Number 2, the claims about seizure prediction, they're scientifically unproven, and from a legal standpoint, they're pretty high risk. And that leads to number 3. The smartest, safest, and most effective path forward is to focus on function, on the real, tangible things a dog can actually be trained to do to help.
And this leads me to a final thought. We've spent this whole time asking one big question, right? But what if it's the wrong question? Maybe we need to reframe this whole conversation. Instead of asking, can my dog predict? What if the better question is, how can my dog help? You see, instead of chasing this unproven and legally risky idea, we ask, how can this incredible animal be trained to actively help me during or after a seizure? Now that question, that one opens the door to real, reliable, and truly life-changing support. And that, right there, is a foundation you can actually build on.